Hello everybody, how are you doing? It's been a while and everything's broken because I had to change things in my computer and change hard drives around, and the drive letters change and everything's fucked now. But I kind of got it going again. So I hope we are all right to do a podcast. That is the plan for tonight, and I'm gonna get going without much further ado because, well, no ground rules, but because I don't have that much time today. But I'm kind of happy that I'm live again and I'm doing this again. Hello, how are you doing? How do I call you? GV? That almost looks like Khalifa. I had to check the emojis there, but that isn't Khalifa. But it looks like it looks very much like Khalifa. Anyway, hope you're doing fine. Today we're gonna discuss something controversial. We're gonna talk about this Columbia Journalism Review piece on the Russiagate coverage. And that'll turn out to be controversial, I'm sure. And it's a lot to cover, so a lot to do. So I'm gonna pretty much start right away. Let's first see if everything's recording. Hope the audio is good. I turned off that damn compressor, OBS fucking compressor. That wasn't working at all. So let's first see if everything's recording. Oh yeah, I think I remember you from. Oh my god, the audio is good. I turned off that damn compressor. That's so long ago. Welcome to my little stream. My god, Identica. I mean, Identica was cool. Jaiku was even better. That was such a good time. That was just another age, I feel. It feels like a different age. Anyway, let's do this. I gotta get going here. Let's get podcasting. Everything is working, I guess. So let's see if I can still remember how to do this. You're listening to The Private Citizen, a podcast where we like to think for ourselves. This is episode 144 for Wednesday, the 15th of February, 2023. Dismantling the Russiagate Delusion. Hello everybody, my name is Fab. I'm your host. I'm coming to you live from the Fab Industries podcasting studios in Düsseldorf in Germany. And yes, live. I finally managed to live stream again. Today we'll be talking about the Columbia Journalism Review piece on the Russiagate, or the Trump-Russia coverage, which is a really good piece of journalism. It's huge, so this will take ages to settle back. Have yourself... I'm having coffee. I need to stay awake for this one. Have yourself a nice beverage, settle back, and enjoy the show. This will be controversial, I think. So that's the topic for today. I don't think I'm going to do any feedback today because I think this will be long enough as it is. You can follow along if you go to privatecitizen.press. There'll be the show notes. I've got lots of pieces. I'm going to read a lot from this article, and I put a lot of that in the show notes. And of course links to everything, mainly to the piece. I hope Jeff Girth won't mind me providing that. I like to do that. It's just it's maybe paranoia, but sometimes these things go away, and I like to have a record in the show notes. Not like the show notes, like I did podcasts in the past where the show notes went away, but let's hope that's not happening for a long time here. So it'll be all at privatecitizen.press. And actually, the one good thing about the new way of how I do podcasting websites, basically, so websites for my podcasts is they're static, so I can export these easily to HTML and put them online. The problem with the old stuff was always it was like a WordPress thing or something I couldn't like afford to keep running. So I hope this will be easier. But let's not talk about that. But before we get into this piece and what we're going to talk about today, a little background here. I haven't put out, so I'm trying to do more episodes. I'm trying to recoup like the episodes I didn't do last year, and in the moment I'm failing even to do enough episodes as it is. And this was just like over the last 3 weeks, it was just like a at first it was just like one shitty thing on top of another. At first there was a lot of work I had to get done. And then I had to fix my computer. I had some problems with my computer that I fixed. In the process, I juggled some hard drives around that I wanted to change anyway, which amongst other things changed my drive letters, which changed a lot of the stuff actually for the podcast and the stream, because I had to redo the whole setup, because a lot of stuff is like dependent on drive letters, which in hindsight is obvious, but I didn't realize before I was doing that because I'm an idiot. And then I was ready to do this episode last week several times, but I think, as you could hear on the last episode, we had new neighbors moving in upstairs, who I've met and who seem to be really nice, but they were making a lot of noise for about a week, which, I'm not blaming them. They're moving in. I didn't quite understand. It sounded like that they were assembling all their furniture with a sledgehammer. They didn't use... I could hear them drilling sometimes with like an electric, screwdriver. But like there was a lot of hammers involved. I don't understand how that works. And then, of course, I had to assemble a kitchen, which, of course, is loudly. You have to put all the cabinets on the wall and shit. So they're done with that now, I think. So I'm knock on wood here. We'll be good to go, because I couldn't, like, you could hear it. I actually I started one recording and I couldn't do it. It was just driving me insane. So I had to deal with all this stuff, but we're done with that now. So, I got lots of episodes lined up. I got the 2 Twitter Files episodes I want to do lined up. Then there's probably more on the Twitter file, or there is more that I want to do after that. But then also I have 2 other topics that I want to do beforehand, because I think they're more urgent, or I just want to do them now. So there's lots of stuff. I just need to find the time to do it. With that out of the way, let's stop talking about what I'm not doing. And let's get this episode started, shall we? So, with all of that out of the way, what are we doing today? We are talking about a very long article. It's about 24,000 words, I think, by Jeff Girth, who is a by now retired. He used to be an investigative journalist for the New York Times for a long time, for many, many, many years. I think he's been a journalist for like 40 years or something. And he went to ProPublica. I think he was one of the first journalists at ProPublica as well. But he moved around, but now he's retired. But he did I think it took him more than a year and a half to do this. He compiled a look at the coverage of Trump in Russia over like Trump's whole presidency and before that, and published it in the Columbia Journalism Review, which is surprising because this is very controversial, and I think they got a lot of flack for this. But the Columbia Journalism Review is kind of like it's very august, right? It's this publication from journalists for journalists. They've written about some stuff in the past that I didn't really agree with them, but it's like everything. But generally, they're very held in a very high regard. And the fact that they published this piece is kind of remarkable. And what is also remarkable is how little attention this has garnered, and how little mainstream outlets have, written about this, and covered this. So I think this is also very important. This is why I wanted to do this as soon as I can on the show. IndieGamiaX is also in chat. Hello. As I'm doing this live, feel free to comment on the show live while we're doing this. I think some live feedback. I'm not going to do a feedback section, but some live feedback might be interesting with this, because this is a very controversial topic. And because I think it's not so much not being covered because it's controversial, but obviously because this is like very scathing towards the actual coverage of the mainstream media coverage during the Trump-Russia years. So it's not surprising to me that, for example, the New York Times hasn't really written about this. As Jeff writes about in this piece, there is actually, CNN, and I think the Washington Post and some other publications have actually since done like a post-mortem on the whole coverage, on their coverage of Trump and Russia, and basically ended up with kind of, apologizing a bit, because this whole coverage is just a disgrace. The Times hasn't done so. What I find remarkable is just as a little side note, because I'm from Germany, and in Germany, the mainstream press, or the light media, as we call them here, have basically copied the Washington Post and New York Times wholesale on this whole topic, which I've talked about in the past on this show as well. And I always thought kind of weird, because it's like American politics, right? And you could think that like a German perspective would be different in some respects, but they've basically taken this whole coverage wholesale. But they, because they've generally been doing at least like the sourcing right. Most of these mainstream sources in Germany have always quoted. They've said, the New York Times has this article about Trump and Russia, and Trump being a Russian agent or whatever, and they've always sourced it with like, this is information from the New York Times. So the Germans could actually, in good conscience, now go and say, well, it seems like if you look at this piece and if you look back at the coverage, we should write about what went wrong. Like what of these, how a lot of these stories, specifically in the Times and the Washington Post, were like, they were just wrong. Right, they were sourced wrong. They were based on wrong information, but the Germans haven't done that either, which kind of surprises me. But I think we should get into. I'm going to read a lot from this today. We should start out. This is kind of how the Jeff Girth introduces his piece. This is kind of the beginning. He says, the end of the long inquiry into whether Donald Trump was colluding with Russia came in July 2019, when Robert Mueller III, the special counsel, took 7 sometimes painful hours to essentially say no. Holy shit, Bob Mueller is not going to do it, is how Dan Barquette, the then executive editor of the New York Times, described the moment his paper's readers realized Mueller was not going to pursue Trump's ouster. And we're talking, of course, about the theory. There are 2 main theories here that the press ran with for like 4 to 5 years, which were Trump is basically under influence of the Russians, and is some papers actually went as far in like columns as calling him a Russian agent. And then the other theory was that the Russians helped Trump win the 2016 election. Now, if you believe these things, if you're here and you're listening to the show and you're like, wasn't that the way it went? I can't really blame you. I mean, I discussed some of this stuff with Mike back in the day, but Mike was on the other side of the argument, and I always was saying, for example, for the first theory, I was saying this makes no sense. It makes no sense that the Russian actually wanted Trump as a president. And I mean, there are reasons, obviously, why they didn't want Hillary Clinton, mostly to do with like the Democrats under Obama and Clinton actually being involved in the whole Ukraine thing, that caused this whole situation, the whole regime change in Ukraine. So I understand that, but I don't think having Trump was better because, I think if you were somebody like Vladimir Putin and you're an ex-spy, you would like somebody predictable. I think maybe even, with the whole theory that he had dirt on Trump, I think the theory that he had dirt on Biden's family was much more credible. But, let's not get into that. But like, I never thought this was a credible idea. And I think it's been borne out, hindsight's always 2020. But when you look back, you can see that as long as Trump was president, Putin didn't escalate in Ukraine. They invaded the country long before Trump became president, in 2014 under Obama, and then didn't escalate this war as long as Trump was president. And as soon as Trump's gone, basically, he escalated it. So I think that speaks against this whole theory. But, people still believe this. If you're still like, wasn't this the case? I can understand, because this was just, even though it was always sourced badly and it was always, the whole theory didn't make any sense. There were, as Jeff Gerth writes, there were literally millions of articles published about this. So that's why people still believe it. The other theory is maybe more credible. We're going to get into that later as well, that, Trump, the Russians helped Trump win the election. I mean, that is true to some extent, because we're pretty sure now that the DNC email hack of Hillary Clinton's email server came from the Russians. So that certainly is a thing, but that wasn't like directly helping Trump, right? That wasn't like, what these people mean that say this, and I've discussed this with Mike on the show previously as well, is that there was the theory that in 2016 there was a huge campaign on Facebook and social media by Russian bots that were influencing the American public to vote for Trump, which is clearly not true. I mean, we've seen this now. It's in this piece. We can't, it's hard to say categorically that something didn't happen. That's very hard to prove, but we have no evidence. And we're going to get into how little evidence, or like what evidence there is for there being a campaign like this, and how laughable it is. So, but I understand that people still believe this. This is why this whole piece is so important, because basically what Gerth here does is he just looks at the stories that were published mostly in the Times and the WAPO, which were basically, leading, breaking stories, and how they were sourced, and why they were bad. Anyway, he continues in the beginning here. Bacat, which was the executive editor of the Times at the time, speaking to his colleagues in a town hall meeting soon after the testimony concluded, acknowledged the Times. Sorry, I think I copied this wrong. Anyway, Bacat, I'm going to fix this on as I read it. Sorry. Bacat speaking to his colleagues in a town hall meeting soon after testimony. I just can't read. This is great for today. Soon after testimony concluded, acknowledged, sorry, I'm an idiot, acknowledged the Times had been caught, quote, tiny bit flat-footed, end quote, by the outcome of Mueller's investigation. That would prove to be more than an understatement, but neither Bacat nor his successor nor any of the paper's reporters would offer anything like a post-mortem of the paper's Trump-Russia saga, unlike the examination the Times did of its coverage before the Iraq War. Famous other journalistic fuck-up where the Times and other journalists just believed the government. The government at the time was, of course, lying about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and they just did the same thing like they did in this coverage, like stupid sourcing with, some people that know what they're talking about, basically anonymous sources, and then that was that. And basically, at the end, it turned out that the stories were all wrong. In fact, Barquette added, I think we covered that story better than anyone else and had the prizes to prove it, according to a tape of the event published by Slate. In a statement to CJR, so the Columbia Journalism Review, the Times continued to stand by its reporting. Not only the prizes it had won, but substantiation of the paper's reporting by various investigations. The paper, quote, thoroughly pursued credible claims, fact-checked, edited, and ultimately produced groundbreaking journalism that was proved true time and again, the statement said. But outside of the Times' own bubble, the damage to the credibility of the Times and its peers persists 3 years on and is likely to take on new energy as the nation faces yet another election season animated by antagonisms toward the press. At its root was an undeclared war between an entrenched media and a new kind of disruptive presidency with its own hyperbolic version of the truth. Before the 2016 election, most Americans trusted the traditional media, and the trend was positive, according to the Edelman Trust Barometer. The phrase, quote, fake news was limited to a few reporters and a newly organized social media watchdog. The idea that the media were, quote, enemies of the American people, end quote, was voiced only once, just before the election on an obscure podcast, and not by Trump, according to a Nexus search. Today, the US media has the lowest credibility, 26% among 46 nations, according to a 2022 study by the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. In 2021, 83% of Americans saw fake news as a problem, and 56%, mostly Republicans and independents, agreed that the media were truly the enemy of the American people. This is more than half American. More than half of all Americans agreeing that the media is the enemy of the American people. Whatever you think about this is absolutely significant, because this shows that there's no trust for the media at all in the US right now. This is according to Rasmussen reports. On the eve of a new era of intense political coverage, this is a look back, so that's how he describes this article. This is a look back at what the press got right and what it got wrong about the man who once again wants to be president. So far, few news organizations have reckoned seriously with what transpired between the press and the presidency during this period. That failure will almost certainly shape the coverage of what lies ahead. And this is, I think, I'm saying this in the beginning of the show, but I think this is the most important point. Everybody gets things wrong, right? I've said this a lot of times. Journalists, doctors, journalists, your plumber, everybody gets things wrong. That is just human. That is not bad. But you need to fess up to it, especially as a journalist. Because you're writing for your readers, and the trust that your readers have in you is it's your only capital, right? As a journalist, you're not like a plumber. You don't, like in Germany, if you become a plumber, you do like this test, right? You do this apprenticeship, and you do tests and whatever, and at the end you get like this diploma you can hang on your wall, and you're now we call it Meister in German. You're a master, right? It's not like, in the UK, for example, not anybody can be a plumber in Germany. You have to have this piece of paper. It's not only for plumbers, it's also for butchers and bakers and everybody. But we don't have that as journalists. We only have our track record. And everybody gets things wrong. I mean, I got things wrong in the past. The important thing is that you are transparent about this, and if people call you out on it, or if you by yourself realize that something is wrong and that you got something wrong, you have to write about, or whatever you're doing. If you do a podcast, you have to do an episode about it and say, this is what I got wrong. And that is the bad part here. That is the thing most of these journalists haven't done. And they're just sweeping this under the rug to an extent to where it is now obvious that most of this reporting was bullshit. Let's call it what it was. It was bullshit. It wasn't even off base. It was bullshit. It was badly sourced. It was just copied. One outlet just copied it from the other without checking on it, it was bullshit. But because they haven't fessed up to it, the majority of people, and I've like, this is just, anecdotal evidence, but like, I would say 95% of people I talk to here in Germany still think like the Steele dossier was legit, and Trump really was under the influence of the Russians and they helped him win the election. And it's scary. It's scary because some of these people are actually journalists, like that are writing about this stuff or have written about this stuff in the past. I mean, that scares the shit out of me. But that's the way it is. And I think it's not only in Germany that, I think the US, I think in the US it's a bit more like bipolar. The divide there is clearer, as you can see from these people not trusting the press, right? There's a larger contingent of people who don't buy this either, and don't believe this. But I think it's more of a, it's not so much based on the understanding of why the sources were bad and why the journalism was bad. It's just like because they are Trump followers and they got called out in the press as basically right-wing people. As I am here, if I say this, if I talk to like even journalist friend or acquaintances, and I'm like, no, this Steele dossier is crap. This whole story is bullshit. They like look at me as if I'm a Nazi, basically. At least now I have a piece in the Columbia Journalism Review where I can go, okay, now read this. I know it's a long piece, but read this and tell me, isn't the guy right? Because, I mean, this is meticulously researched. Anyway, speaking of meticulously researched, let's keep going here. So, Jeff Gerth, this is well worth reading. If you're into media critique, then reading this is well worth doing. But I think lots of people won't. Like, it basically took me 2 days to work through this with taking notes and stuff. It's a long piece. It's extremely detailed. It's very good. So he basically goes through the Steele dossier and then all the FBI and special counsel investigations, the Mueller investigation that followed, and all the stories that were written on that, compares them with stuff that came out after in court, and that came out in the investigation, compared to what they wrote about the Steele dossier before and all of that. So it's very interesting. If you are interested in how this piece came about, I can also recommend, I put a link in the show notes, Private Citizen Press. I can recommend Matt Taibbi, has on his Substack, has commentary about this article, and he also has a short interview with Gerth on how it came to pass. So that's very interesting. So we have to look into what happened here. First off, there's the Steele dossier. And this was basically the catalyst for all of these stories. So what happened is, maybe I'm going to read a little bit here in the beginning, and then I'm going to try to condense this down for you. But like, it's very important to get the details in the beginning, right? So Gerth writes, in late May 2016, Glenn Simpson, a former Wall Street Journal reporter, so this is important, a former Wall Street Journal reporter and a Fusion co-founder, flew to London to meet Steele. So there was this company called Fusion GPS. GPS doesn't stand for Global Positioning System. At least they don't say that they do that. It's like a private investigation firm. They do opposition research mostly. And that it was founded by two people from the Wall Street Journal. So in late May 2016, Glenn Simpson, a former Wall Street Journal reporter and a Fusion co-founder, flew to London to meet Steele, a former official within MI6, the British spy agency. We're talking here about the Secret Intelligence Service. This MI6 is, that's the spy service James Bond works with. It's like the external intelligence service. Steele had his own investigative firm, Orbis Business Intelligence. By then, Fusion had assembled records on Trump's business dealings and associates with some Russia ties from a previous, now terminated engagement. The client for the old job was the Washington Free Beacon, a conservative online publication backed in part by Paul Singer, a hedge fund billionaire and a Republican Trump critic. Weeks before the London trip, Fusion signed a new research contract with the law firm representing the Democratic National Committee and the Clinton campaign. This is important because lots of people think that the Steele dossier came out of research done, or this was what the New York Times reported at the time as well, at some point, that the Steele dossier was created by Republicans who were against Trump, which isn't true. Fusion GPS was working on research on Trump, but as Girth later points out and also shows with court records and everything, is that this data wasn't given to Steele. So they just got a new contract we're talking by the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC to do opposition research on Trump. That's where the Steele dossier comes from. So, interestingly, all the negative stuff about when people talk about the Hunter Biden laptop story, why that was so bad and so untrustworthy, because it came obviously from the Republicans to hurt the Biden campaign. The Steele dossier is exactly the same thing. This is the Clinton campaign trying to hurt Trump, and we're gonna see that it was bullshit. But basically, what happened, interestingly. To sum this up, is what is going on is the Clinton campaign has this information compiled to hurt Trump, but never really gets it to the press before Trump gets elected. So one of the reasons for that is that the press holds back. I think the Washington Post at this point holds back, got some of this information, but holds it back, and the Times also. And I think because they didn't think, it was this big thing back then, they didn't think Trump was going to win. Nobody thought Trump was going to win. I can remember the day before the election, I was still working at the publishing company I was working for, which, was a tech publication, so they're all very progressive. And I remember the day before the election saying, it was the day of the election, I think, technically, but we're in Germany, so we're ahead of time, right? And I'm just saying, Trump might just win this. And everybody just laughing at me. They're laughing at me. And I can remember I went to bed early, I didn't stay up for this. And I was like, if I wake up tomorrow morning, I said to my wife, if I wake up tomorrow morning and Trump has won this, I will not be surprised. And I wake up in the morning, I look on my phone, I'm like, okay, yeah. Looks like he won this. Which, I'm not a pro-Trump guy. I was neither pro-Trump nor pro-Hillary. If I was in the US, I wouldn't have voted for any of those people. But people back then, they just couldn't, it just didn't factor in that Trump would win. And I think the press got a huge shock. And you could actually see it if you watch back, if you look at coverage of the TV networks while the thing is going on. And it's very obvious that Trump's now won. And they still, for an hour or two, they still don't want to believe it. They just they just can't process it. It's kind of a little bit like the September 11 when the second plane hit. And it's now obvious that the first plane hit wasn't an accident. But they can't, people live on TV at the moment, they just can't process it. And this was kind of the same thing. So when it became clear that Trump had now won and that the worst had happened, this is now when the press is suddenly more open to engage with this bullshit dossier. And this is why then it hit, which is funny because it came from the Clinton, kind of funny, in a very macabre way. It kind of came from the Clinton campaign, but Clinton had already lost. But it still then later, almost a year later, got used in the press. It kind of came back as a revenge from the grave, so to speak. So basically, to skip a lot of the stuff here, if you want the details, it's all in the show notes. There's much more detail. I don't want to read out all of this, but basically, this Steele guy collected, like it's not like he wrote the dossier, which it's not really a dossier. It's like, I have it right here, right? You can find it on the internet. It's since been released, and it's more like, reports. It's a couple of reports, and it's he like got it, I think, mainly, as we know now, from like one source, and a lot of it is just hearsay and rumors, but it's quite interesting, because it's like, if you read it, right? If you read through, if I put myself in the role of a journalist, I read through this, I would be extremely skeptical. And the journalists at the time were also extremely skeptical. They didn't, but it's like it doesn't come out in the coverage, right? In this piece, actually, the FBI, which I don't like, as you know by recent episodes, not a fan of the FBI, but like, the FBI comes off quite well, because what happens is this hits the press, right? And then the FBI goes and investigates it, and actually, they actually paid Steele for a while as an informant, and they get into this, and they realize that this is, as several FBI agents at the time, and one actually tells the press, this is unverified and unverifiable. There's lots of information in here where you go like, there's no way you can verify that. Which, as a journalist, you can't really, if you're not working for like the worst, like yellow press, rainbow press kind of outfit, you cannot use information like that, right? It's one thing to have information that could be plausible, where you're like, hey, this is, I could maybe, if I get the right person, I can verify this, but you can't. It's one thing to publish that, right? You shouldn't generally do that, but if it's the only way and you think it's plausible, and it might be true, and it's very important information, and there is sometimes an argument for publishing that. But if you have information where, by the very nature of the information, you know that it's unverifiable, it's kind of like, it's hard to come up like with an example, but like, if you go like, so Trump did this, and he knew at the time that, this is corruption or I don't know, collusion or whatever. But like, the only way, like, there's no way to externally verify that Trump knew, because you know that he never talked to anybody about this. But there's this guy who knows Trump, who's close to him, who says he knew at the time, and you like, there's no way you can verify that. This is not information you can ever use as a journalist. You can't even use that as background information, really, because you just can't believe it. Like, and that is like a huge red flag. And you can't, like, we almost certainly know that the journalists realized this, because you have the FBI realizing this, who had the same, they just looked at the dossier, like, and if you read it, I have a link in the show notes if you want to read it, you know what I mean. It's like, it's obvious. You can kind of tell at this moment in time that the journalists didn't care. Like, the journalists in question didn't care. They thought it was bad that Trump was elected, which is, they thought that was horrible. And then the whole thing with the fight with the press kicked off. And I understand that. I completely understand that. And I understand the impetus to then go digging into, like, that's what you do. That's a good journalistic instinct. But the problem is, I think what happened is they came up with material that was handed to them, and they didn't, because they wanted it to be true, as the journalistic saying goes, a story too good to check. they didn't check. Otherwise, they would have. Now, it's not even that. Like, they couldn't check it, right? So, but like, they just ignored the fact that it was uncheckable. So now, basically, we have this dossier. This was compiled by the Clinton campaign, and it gets pitched to the press. But before it actually ends up in the press, we actually have another story that we need to talk about that is even worse, which is the Alpha Bank story, right? The Alpha Bank story is bullshit. It was bullshit when it came out. You could immediately tell. It was a story about the Russian bank called Alpha Bank having like this secret server back channel thing to the Trump campaign. And I don't even want to go into the details because it is it's just obviously dumb, right? It's like it's like technically dumb, and it was a dumb story. But this was another thing that came out of the Clinton campaign, as Girth writes here in his story. So we're now in September. This is September 2016. This is before the election, and we already have the Clinton campaign having the Steele dossier, and we already have. Actually, I'm going to go back to here. So the Girth writes, so on July 26th, the campaign, so this is the Clinton campaign, allegedly upped the ante. Behind the scenes, Clinton was said to have approved a, quote, proposal from one of her foreign policy advisors to vilify Donald Trump by stirring up a scandal claiming interference by Russian security services, according to notes declassified in 2020 of a briefing CIA Director John Brennan gave President Obama a few days later. So we kind of know that they were trying to do some of this. They have the Steele dossier, but that so far hasn't been like pitched to the press. Now, the next story. The Clinton campaign in mid-September was eagerly anticipating a, quote, bombshell story on Trump Russia from the Times. It was causing a Trump freak out, headlined a private September 18th memo by Sidney Blumenthal, a longtime Clinton confidant. His memo circulated among top campaign aides, the two Fusion leaders Elias and Michael Sussman, then a partner in the same firm as Elias. 2 hours after Sussman received the memo, he texted the private phone James Baker, who we know, James Baker from the FBI, later at Twitter, tried to suppress the Twitter files, then got fired by Elon Musk, James Baker, the general counsel of the FBI, seeking a meeting on a, quote, sensitive matter. They met the next afternoon, where Sussman briefed him about the back channel allegations. Sussman upped the ante with Baker by pointing out that the media, soon understood to be the Times, was about to publish something about the supposed secret Russia communication link. Sussman later testified to Congress that he gave the story to a Times reporter, Eric Lichtblau. So, we have the FBI leaking this to the press. As the election entered its final weeks, Lichtblau thought there was a bigger story beyond the FBI rejection of the Alpha Bank theory. The bureau, the paper had learned, was conducting a broader counterintelligence investigation into possible Russian ties to Trump aides. So this is also to do with the Steele dossier that the FBI also had. In mid-October, two Times reporters, Adam Goldman and Matt Apuzzo, were in California, where they met with a top federal official who cautioned them about the larger FBI inquiry, according to current and former Times reporters. After Burkett, so the Times editor, heard the feedback from California, the story stayed on hold, according to current and former Times journalists. Finally, at the end of the month, the languishing story was published. So this is like kind of the first Trump-Russia story that actually makes it to the press. The headline read, "Investigating Donald Trump, FBI sees no clear link to Russia." The top of the piece dealt with the FBI's doubts about the Alpha Bank allegation and waited until the 10th paragraph to disclose the broader inquiry. It also noted that the FBI believed the hacking operation, quote, was aimed at disrupting the presidential election rather than electing Mr. Trump. So this is also, it's not Alpha Bank, but like there's also, the hacking allegations. The piece mentioned a letter to Comey the day before from Senator Reid, who again was trying to spur the FBI to look into what he believed was, quote, explosive information. The letter, according to Myers, was an impetus for publishing the story. Another factor Times journalist said, was the publication earlier that day of a piece about the Alpha Trump allegations in Slate, which wrote less critical about the supposed back channel at length, though the title framed it as a question. That piece's author, Franklin Foer, worked closely with Fusion, money quote, forwarding drafts of his stories to the private investigative firm prior to their publication, according to court records. Okay, so this is, in case people don't, this is a big no. This, you never do this as a journalist. You learn this very quickly. I learned this. I'm not talking about the FBI here or some intelligence service or the police or whatever. Like in Germany, they're not that stupid that they want to try this. But occasionally you get a PR firm. Like I had this when I wrote tech stories, right? You get information from a company, from a PR department, from a company or a PR firm. And they're like, oh yeah, can you send us the story? We want to look at the story before publication, and we want to make sure that you don't make any mistakes. And as a journalist, you never do this, right? You go, no, we have editors for that. We will do that in-house. You can send them like quotes, like the thing to do. Some people also want you interview them, right? And then they want the interview, and they want to check that. Which is like totally idiotic, because I mean that's the reason why you record interviews, so you have a recording, so nobody after you publish can claim that they never said this. Then you can release the recording. But like some people try that, right? And like if you as a journalist you actually agree to something like this, then you're not a journalist. You never do this. You never, right? It's just like, and this guy is like, gets information from this like opposition research firm, and then he even like forwards them. Like, this makes it look like he works for that fucking company. Oh. Yeah, it's interesting. Now, interesting is that like this is apparently Clinton knew about this as well. So Clinton had also been aware of the Times unpublished story. She hoped it, quote, would push the Russia story onto the front burner of the election, but was, quote, crestfallen when an aide showed her the headline, according to an account in Merchants of Truth, a 2019 book about the news media by Jill Abramson, former executive editor of the Times. The story was a closely guarded secret, but campaign operatives had been pushing it with Times reporters and were aware of some internal deliberations, according to the book by Fusion's founder. So they also wrote a book about this whole thing, which is handy. Moreover, the candidate herself was aware of efforts to push the Trump-Russia story to the media, according to court testimony. And this is all before the election, right? This is why this Times story is so lackluster, right? This is why the headline was so disappointing to the Clinton campaign, right? Investigating Donald Trump, FBI sees no clear link to Russia. Because this is before the election. This is when they still had standards. These standards, like these journalistic standards, only get turned upside down once Trump wins. And now we have this, right? Now the press is dismayed, and Clinton has lost, but this material, like the Steele dossier, still turns up, starts hitting the press now. So we're talking here Halloween 2016. That Halloween night, the Clinton campaign, anticipating the imminent publication of the Alpha Bank story, was prepared to, quote, light it up, Fritsch emailed a reporter that morning. Another story Fusion helped arrange appeared that day too, in the left-leaning magazine Mother Jones. It said a, quote, veteran spy had provided FBI information about an alleged 5-year Russian operation to cultivate and coordinate with Trump. So we're talking Steele, right? So this is the first stuff coming out based on the Steele dossier. I love that it's a 5-year operation, because the Russian 5-year plans. It's kind of like they're so taking the piss with this. Like, why as a journalist? Why does like this? That would immediately, if I got this like, oh, it's a 5-year operation. Like, what? That's a bit of a coincidence. That headline almost writes itself, right? Russian 5-year plan to turn Trump into an agent. That came from Steele's dossier. Within hours, the FBI contacted Steele, who confirmed, quote, that he had been a source for the article. After working with the Bureau for several months as a confidential informant on the Russia inquiry, he was terminated by the FBI. Bureau documents show. Before the election, the author of the article, David Korn, provided a copy of the dossier to Baker, the FBI's general counsel, a longtime acquaintance. It was a standard journalistic ploy to try and get information out of them because I knew they had the dossier, Korn said in an interview, but he added it didn't work. After the election that ushered Trump into office, the Times began to undertake some soul-searching about its Trump-Russia coverage. The intelligence community did its own assessment on Russia, including a new take by the FBI. Right, the FBI now kind of turns a little bit as well. We know the whole thing, the whole story there with, the text messages and all of that. But interestingly, so now we come to how did the Steele dossier, how did this information end up to become the basis for stories in the press? And that's actually quite amazing. So I'm going to have to read this out because this is the main point how the Steele dossier comes out. In the windowless conference room at Trump Tower on January 6th, 2017, January 6th, by the way, Comey briefed the president-elect, so Comey's the FBI, the head of the FBI at the time, briefed the president-elect about the dossier about him and Russia. Quote, the only thing that really resonated, Trump said about the briefing, because this is Girth Got Trump, right? He interviewed Trump twice for this story, which is quite amazing, actually. So this is how well he sourced this shit. The only thing that really resonated, Trump said about the briefing, was when he said 4 hookers, a reference to the unsubstantiated claim of a salacious encounter in Moscow. Trump's immediate reaction was that, quote, this is not going to be good for the family, he recalled. But his wife, Melania, quote, did not believe it at all, end quote, telling him, quote, that's not your deal with the golden shower, Trump recalled. Trump's marriage might have survived, but his hope for honeymoon with the press was at an end. Was about to end. The dossier, largely suppressed by the media in 2016, was about to surface. This is hilarious. I mean, you can say about Trump whatever you want, right? But he's like he can be very direct, and I just love that he's like, Melania didn't believe this because she was like, that's just not your kink. Like the golden shower is just not your kink. And that's another thing with the Steele dossier. It's so like, I mean, so the idea, so the whole thing is like the theory is that Trump was in Moscow, in a very posh hotel, and that the FSB basically set him up in a hotel room and set up that he got like 4 hookers and they had a golden shower on a bed. So in case you don't know what that is they peed on him. The general idea is actually quite believable because this is, well, it's a bit out there spy story, but it was a known KGB tactic in the Cold War. I mean, the American the CIA did this apparently as well. But like, the idea was you had a hotel room that you had like wired and you had set up with cameras and everything, and then you would set up a thing with the guy you wanted to have compromise blackmail material on, and then you would buy him hookers or whatever, set this whole thing up, and then he would have sex in that hotel room. You filmed it. And then you basically, he was your man. You now had material on this, and this is a well-documented tactic how the KGB actually recruited agents who they then had material on. And so far this is quite good, but then they go in like way heavy-handed with the fucking golden shower. And at the time, I remember I was like, this is. Like, my instincts were just like, it's too much. This is like unbelievable. This is like a fucking conspiracy theory, which it is. But it's like a fucking internet conspiracy theory. And it's at some point, I mean, it's very sad. But at some point, it's hilarious and ironic how the press fell for a really bad conspiracy theory here. And then for years kept calling the people that said, like, this is bullshit, like conspiracy theorists. Even though they fell, like, for the worst kind of fucking ex-spy cobbled together fucking piece of shit dossier conspiracy theory. And it just ran with it. Because people, familiar with the matter, and they're spies, so you know they're trustworthy. They're the intelligence community. If it wasn't so sad, it would actually be quite funny. Anyway, on Sunday, January 8th, McCabe, the FBI's deputy director, sent a memo to the bureau's leadership headlined, quote, "The flood is coming." He noted that CNN was close to publishing a piece about the dossier, with the trigger being Comey's brief and the dossier's attachment to the ICA. So ICA is like an informal, like an intelligence briefing thing, and they, gets that people get briefed on, and president or Congress, and they put the dossier with that. The dam broke 2 days later when CNN disclosed the Comey briefing. Hours later, BuzzFeed News posted the full dossier with a warning that the material was, quote, unverified and potentially unverifiable. Right? This is, it's BuzzFeed. Who is surprised? But like, this is where the dam broke and everything goes to shit. From here on out, the whole media coverage goes to shit because of BuzzFeed, who are like saying this is unverifiable. This is the worst kind of fucking like yellow press thing. Like, we're publishing this, we cannot verify it. We are sure that it probably can't be. It's so bad. Both outlets cited the government use of the dossier to justify their going ahead. Comey, in his 2018 book, A Higher Loyalty, wrote that CNN had, quote, informed the FBI press office they were going to run with it as soon as the next day. So, quote, I could see no way out of telling Trump. Comey also cited CNN's imminent disclosure in a subsequent explanation to Trump, according to Comey's notes. Ben Smith, the then editor of BuzzFeed News, said in an interview the decision was a, quote, journalistic no-brainer, especially since BuzzFeed was a, quote, slightly fringy place. I loved Matt Taibbi on his podcast with Walter Kern. I think Walter Kern goes, yeah, of course it was a no-brainer, meaning like they didn't use any fucking brains in this decision. A BuzzFeed reporter, Ken Benzinger, got access to the dossier via David Kramer, a close associate of then Senator John McCain. He photographed the pages, so this is the link I have in the show notes as well. You can see it's like the dossier is like it's just like photos of the document. He photographed the pages when Kramer was out of the room. Classic. According to Kramer's testimony in a libel suit, Kramer also testified he would not have granted access to Benzinger if he knew BuzzFeed would publish. Benzinger had been vetting the dossier but was on vacation at Disney World with his family when CNN aired its story. A BuzzFeed editor called him to say the publication planned to publish the entire document, a possibility that had not previously been discussed, Benzinger said in an interview. A few minutes later, in a call with Smith and other editors, Benzinger voiced his opposition to publishing the raw material, but was told the decision had already been made. So yeah, this is how, like, this whole thing reads kind of like, if you read like on Wikipedia has like a good minute by minute rundown of the Chernobyl disaster, and this kind of reads the same way. It's like all these people making bad decisions because they want to cover their own asses, or they just like, believe in certain things and they're just being really idealistic or dumb or whatever. But it's like, It just reads like that. It's just a comedy of horrible errors. What I find interesting here is that if you think about the thing I just read, right, then what we will see is that the press justified publishing this dossier because the FBI had briefed the president on it, right? So the press said, well, it's been used in a government briefing, so there has to be something to it. Or because of that, it's like newsworthy. But the FBI had done so because it had been told by the press, i.e. CNN, that they would publish information on the dossier or something based on the dossier. So this is like the best. This is like circular reasoning at its finest. Like the press says, we published this because this was used by the government, but the government used it because another part of the press had told them they would publish. It's just so bad. And of course, as I said, the biggest problem here obviously is that in the beginning, that we know from the beginning that the dossier is bullshit, and they knew, right? So let's go into this as well. It turns out that a few weeks after the FBI began checking out the dossier, in the fall of 2016, it offered Steele as much as $1 million if he could offer corroboration, and he didn't, according to court testimony by an FBI official in October. So basically, right, this is like you come up with this thing, and then the FBI says, "Oh, we're going to give you $1 million if you can corroborate it," and you don't do that. Like, what would be the reason? What would be the only reason Steele didn't do that? Because he couldn't fucking corroborate it, obviously. Steele, in a response to my questions earlier this year, so, Girth also corresponded with Steele, wrote that his quote, raw intelligence reports were meant only, quote, for client oral briefing rather than finished and assessed written intelligence product, which would have contained sourcing caveats. Thus, Steele wrote, the quality of the dossier report was fine, in my opinion. He said only one minor detail had been disproved, with the rest either corroborated or unverified. So one detail has been disproved, and the rest can't be disproved. I don't think I would have to read the dossier again, but I'd be hard pressed to find anything that has been corroborated in there, other than by like news stories that were based on the dossier. CNN story claimed, quote, Steele's investigations related to Mr. Trump were initially funded by groups and donors supporting Republican opponents of Mr. Trump during the GOP primaries. Wrong. But the sponsors of the dossier, writing in a book in 2019, made clear the dossier came later as a separate project, and the research trove commissioned by anti-Trump Republicans was never shared with Steele. Steele confirmed that in his response to my questions. Hours after the Times story ran, the Post upped the temperature on Russia even more. Columnist David Ignatius disclosed that incoming National Security Advisor Michael Flynn had phoned Russia's U.S. ambassador, quote, several times at the end of the year, according to a senior U.S. government official. On the heels of the Ignatius column, the FBI's investigative tempo increased, according to FBI records, and the Senate Intelligence Panel announced an inquiry into Russia's election activities. 2 days after the Senate announcement, Bob Woodward, of Watergate fame, appearing on Fox News, called the dossier a garbage document that never should have been part of an intelligence brief. I mean, it's not like, the thing is, this was bullshit from the beginning, and then you have the 2 days after, you have Bob Woodward going, this is bullshit. Bob Woodward. If you're a fucking investigative journalist and you're at the New York Times, you want to fucking be Bob Woodward, right? He's like your hero. He's the Watergate hero. Listen to fucking Bob Woodward. I mean, if you don't have enough of a brain that you read this and you go, it's like this dossier, and you go, it's like shit. At least listen to fucking Bob Woodward. But he's like on Fox News, so you can't trust him, or whatever they thought at the time. I don't know. They obviously weren't thinking much. He later told me that the Post wasn't, so he used to be at the Washington Post, obviously. He later told me that the Post wasn't interested in his harsh criticism of the dossier. After his remarks on Fox, Woodward said he, quote, reached out to people who covered this at the paper, identifying them only generically as reporters, to explain why he was so critical. Asked how they reacted, Woodward said, to be honest, there was a lack of curiosity on the part of the people at the Post about what I said. Why I said this, and I accepted that, and I didn't force it on anyone. So, you have the the FBI cautioning the Times before the election about this whole investigation. You have Bob Woodward telling the Post that the dossier is obviously bullshit, and they just don't listen to it. They just don't listen to it. They could have listened to it. They don't. They just want Trump gone so badly, and now we have like this. I think this idea where they smell a second Watergate, and they want to be the new Bob Woodward. So they, story's too good to check, so they don't. And we have people like Liz Bate, who was the Times public editor at the time. The public editor is kind of like the watchdog, like the is supposed to criticize the reporting of their own publication, and she does, but she later got fired. And the Times actually got rid of that position altogether, because they just didn't want to listen to their own criticism. And then the Times. Now this is one of the best parts from this whole article, because the Times is so sure of themselves that what they have here is they have proof that Trump is under influence of the Russians, and that this is like the new Watergate, and they're so sure of that they do something that in hindsight is incredibly embarrassing. So to read more from Jeff Gerth, a story here. Even as those debates were unfolding in the Times newsroom, so the discussion about like their coverage and how it's Spade says really bad, talking about the Alpha Bank story, but like even as those debates were unfolding in the Times newsroom, the paper was about to land what it thought was its bombshell. The paper was so sure of itself that it let a filmmaker capture internal deliberations which wound up airing on a 2018 series on Showtime called The Fourth Estate. As the story is being edited, Mark Mazzetti, an investigative reporter in the Washington Bureau, who was also helping edit some of the Trump-Russia coverage, is shown telling senior editors he is, quote, fairly sure members of Russian intelligence were having conversations with members of Trump's campaign. The story would say the conversations were based on, quote, phone records and intercepted calls and involved, quote, senior Russian intelligence officials. He asked Bacat, are we feeding into a conspiracy with the recurring themes of contacts? Bacat responded that he wanted the story up high to, quote, show the range and level of contacts and meetings, some of which may be completely innocent and not sinister, followed by a nut or summary graph explaining why this is something that continues to hobble them. Bacat's desire to flesh out the details of supposed contacts is similar to his well-founded skepticism in October 2016 about the supposed computer links between a Russian bank and the Trump organization. So here we have the executive editor actually doing a good thing, being skeptical about this, like they were skeptical about the Alpha Bank story. Mazzetti reports back that the story is, quote, nailed down. Bacat asks, can you pull it off? Oh yeah, Mazzetti replies. So Bacat signs off, adding that it's the biggest story in years. Elizabeth Buehler, the Washington bureau chief, adds her seal of approval. There'll be hair on fire. Yeah, there was hair on fire. There was your fucking hair on fire. Because the story is bullshit. The story said the FBI declined to comment. In fact, the FBI was quickly ripping the piece to shreds in a series of annotated comments by Strzok, who managed the Russiagate. So this is Peter Strzok. This is the guy whose text messages got leaked. Basically, where when Trump is elected, he's having an affair with like a lawyer in the FBI, and he's like telling her, "Yeah, we'll get rid of Trump." So he's anti-Trump. So this is the anti-Trump guy ripping this story to shreds. His analysis prepared for his bosses found numerous inaccuracies, including a categorical refutation of the lead and headline. We are unaware, Strzok wrote, of any Trump advisors engaging in conversations with Russian intelligence officials. Comey immediately checked with other intelligence agencies to see if they had such evidence, came up empty, and relayed his finding to a closed Senate briefing, according to testimony at a Senate hearing months later. This is like the FBI head going, bringing up the CIA and the NSA and all of the other 14 intelligence, the Department of Energy Intelligence Service or whatever. They're like, did you read this story in the Times? Do we know anything about this? Everybody goes, nah, they just made that up. Oh my God, if it wasn't so sad, and if it wouldn't have basically destroyed what people know, destroyed history, because people still think this is all true. It would be so funny. In the article's discussion of the dossier, it described Steele as having a, quote, credible track record, and noted the FBI had recently contacted some of Steele's sources. Actually, the FBI had recently interviewed Steele's primary source, a Russian working at a Washington think tank, who told them Steele's reporting was, quote, misstated or exaggerated, and the Russians' own information was based on rumor and speculation, according to notes of the interview released later. The day the Times piece appeared in print, Strzok emailed colleagues and reported that Steele may not be in a position to judge the reliability of his network of sources, according to the Justice Department documents released in 2020. So what we have here is the FBI internally going, this story is bullshit. And the Times went, the FBI declined to comment. If they really have that good context to people familiar with the matter, in quotes, they could have just asked these people at the FBI, right? I mean, they have context there. And they had cautioned them before about this bullshit. The Times piece was, quote, the peak of the frenzy over Trump in Russia. Cullison, the Wall Street Journal reporter who covered the issue, told me. It's kind of like the Watergate burglary, Woodward said, because it helped launch the issue. Right. Woodward knows what he's talking about in that case. Trump would often call the Times failing, including the day after the controversial story about Russia-Trump ties. But in fact, the soaring digital subscriber base through his presidency offset the steady fall in revenue from print subscribers and advertising. So that's the thing, right? That this is follow the money. This story actually, they reached their goal at the Times. They wrote these stories that were bullshit, that I don't know if they knew they were bullshit or they just ignored. They just wanted them to be right. They basically destroyed their credibility in the process, if you look at the general population. But, they wrote these stories for their new subscriber base, right? For the people that read the New York Times now, the people that want to believe this stuff, right? The people that apparently don't want good journalism. They just want to be told what they already believe. Right? They believe Donald Trump is evil, so they want stories that tell them Donald Trump is evil, no matter how shitty these stories are. Yeah. And, I could go on. There's more stuff here. On June 8th at a Senate hearing, Comey was asked whether the Times story was, quote, almost entirely wrong. He said yes. He told the senator they were correct when they said he had surveyed the intelligence community after the article came out to see whether you were missing something. Comey also agreed. He later told senators in a closed briefing shortly after the Times piece was published, I don't know where this is coming from, but it is not the case. So the thing is, this is just the beginning of the media versus Donald Trump. So it's not like the media ran some stories. The Times, the Post, they ran some stories, BuzzFeed, and then they had a theory and they had more and more material come up and they just followed the story. They ran these initial stories and they got told by people familiar with the matter that they usually source, like the intelligence community, they so like to listen to, that this was bullshit. Right? So they continued with this push because they wanted to believe it. That is the bad thing here. That is the bad thing about it. It's not about making a mistake. and then, continuing to make this mistake because you don't have any contrary information. They made a mistake, and then they basically got called out on this mistake, not only by voices in the public, but people who should know, who had originally, apparently, as they thought, given them this information. So they had every reason to go back and doubt this shit now, but they just double down. And I think this is also why now these journalists and these publications, they can't fess up to it. Because if you read the whole piece by Girth, you got some journalists who actually talked to him, who were involved, who were writing at the time, who do not believe this anymore right now, and who actually you can tell they have some remorse by the way they talk about this. Then the other ones that were just doubled down, but you can see that they knew, and that people also lost the faith in these stories, but they kept doubling down because it was making them money, it was working. They got applauded by the people that wanted to be applauded, and everybody else they just branded as Trump supporters, conspiracy theorists, white supremacists, whatever. And that is the really bad thing here. That is the change to the Iraq war coverage, where the press went, actually at some point they went, we did something wrong here. We made a mistake, and we should not make this mistake again. Here they're just doubling down. And that is what is destroying society right now, because there are people who now call these outlets out on this shit rightly, who still get labeled as conspiracy theorists, even though the ones that fell for the conspiracy theory are the journalists in this case. And they made it up to some extent. And now I'm going to skip this, but we now have a point where the Times and the Post actually win a Pulitzer Prize for this coverage, which they still have today, and they stand by, as we heard in the beginning. Yeah, I mean, they have more stories. They have this meeting in 2016 where Donald Trump Jr. and a Russian lawyer, Natalia Velnitskaya, they have information on this meeting, and now it's that's the next story. But as Girth writes, ironically, the only information given to the Trump delegation at the meeting was a memo prepared by Fusion, the sponsor of the dossier, about some obscure Clinton donors mixed up in Russian business dealings. So again, this other scandal where it's Trump had a meet. Yeah. He got handed some information by the same company that made up that dossier that you like so much. The month after the Pulitzers were announced, Showtime aired the fourth-part documentary film about the Times pursuit of the Russia story, The Fourth Estate. Other films were in the works. This is hilarious. So there is at some point here, there's everybody thinks this is the new Watergate, and they're gonna make some movies about this, and one project was actually involving Robert Redford's production company and the Washington Post. Now, this is interesting because, I don't know if you know, but there is a very famous movie from the 70s, I think, All the President's Men, which is about Watergate, where Robert Redford actually plays Bob Woodward. And so we have basically Redford's production company probably thinking, okay, this is the new Watergate. We can do All the President's Men Part 2. And then that project stalled. Girth writes that some people at the Post say that the Post dropped out of the project in 2021. I feel like, I don't know, this is a total conspiracy theory, but I have this idea that Redford's production company did some research as well for this movie and looked probably at the Steele dossier and went, we can't, like, these stories they're writing, they're not, like, this is not Watergate. They're not good. They're not good stories. We can't make a movie on this because they're just basically making this up. This is all based on bullshit. So I have this theory that Hollywood, you know, which usually can make money out of all kinds of bullshit, that Hollywood went like, no, we can't do this. Meanwhile, the Times and the Washington Post still run with the story for a few more years. So that's like the Steele dossier, right? This is like Trump is a Russian agent. Now I said the second thing, the press was the second major theme. The press was pushing here, and then we're pushing this even longer than the Russian agent story, because when Mueller didn't corroborate that kind of died. But there was this thing, the Russians won Trump the election, right? In 2016. So this is very interesting because a lot of people still believe that today as well. In the aftermath of the summit, so this is like Trump met with Putin for the first time, actually. And then everybody is like, he's meeting his handler. So stories coming up again. In the aftermath of the summit, Trump's critics believed the worst. A YouGov Economist poll found that 2/3 of Democrats were definitely or somewhat sure that Russia tampered with vote tallies in order to get Donald Trump elected. Despite the U.S. intelligence community's assessment in January 2017 that it couldn't measure, quote, the impact that Russian activities had on the outcome of the 2016 election. So this is the intelligence services saying that. The Times weighed in at over 10,000 words in September with its own verdict. The plot to subvert an election, the headline read. The first sentence described an obscure banner of Putin that unfurled on his birthday a few weeks before the election on a Manhattan bridge. The report quickly noted that the banner was promoted by fake Twitter accounts that ultimately were traced back to the Internet Research Agency, IRA, a privately owned troll operation in Russia. This was part the Times concluded in the fourth paragraph of the quote, the most effective foreign interference in an American election in history. To help buttress its sweeping conclusion, the Times wrote that Facebook posts by the IRA had an eventual audience of 126 million Americans, describing that as an quote impressive reach that almost matched the number of voters in the election. For most of the media and official Washington, the impact of Russian activities on the 2016 election loomed large, though a number of rigorous academic studies that the media largely ignored painted a more benign footprint. Gareth Porter, a veteran journalist and historian, called the Times description of the IRA's eventual audience of 126 million bogus because Facebook had told Congress and reporters months earlier that the figure was only a potential audience for IRA content over 2 years, including 9 months after the election. When Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg testified several months before the piece, he said approximately 126 million people may have been served content from the IRA. This is, of course, based, after this. We talked about this part of the Twitter files and, the FBI going on a mission to, like, censor the internet because the Russians meddled with the election. And we had, like, Twitter not being able to corroborate this. This is like, Twitter, Facebook, they all got, like, the CEOs all got, like, summoned in front of Congress for inquiries about this, and they really couldn't, like, corroborate this idea. It's because this idea came from journalists who just basically made most of it up. And then the social media companies were like, but we can't see this in our own data. And actually, there's a story in the Twitter files which we're going to talk about at some point here as well, as Hamilton 68 story, where basically it's more of this shit, like basically some think tank going, there's all these Russian bots on Twitter, and Twitter going, where do they got this from? And then they look at, to just summarize the story, they look at the API request, because, obviously that think tank accesses Twitter server and has API access, and Twitter looks at their API access, looks at the data they have, reverse engineers their list of Russian bots and goes, this is all bullshit. So you have this again and again. But anyway, let's continue with this from this piece. Facebook data submitted to Congress about the IRA's ads on its site further diminished their impact. More than half of the impressions associated with the IRA's Facebook ads came after the election. Porter, writing in Consortium News, that the Times' use of the 126 million audience number, plus the piece's failure to reflect that Facebook users were exposed to 33 trillion news feeds during the relevant period, should vie in the annals of journalism as one of the most spectacularly misleading use of statistics of all time. As for the IRA's supposed efficiency, noted in the article, the Times piece didn't include Facebook submissions to Congress that called the IRA's targeting relatively rudimentary, with only a small fraction having anything to do with the election or specific geographic targets. Court filings in 2019 showed that the total value of the IRA's Facebook ads that were deemed election-related amounted to $2,930 in a political cycle where billions of dollars were spent. The only reporter to write about that finding was Sperry of Real Clear Investigations. $3,000. So this whole story about how this IRA outfit, this troll farm, which is said to be under the control of the Russian government, which isn't corroborated either. It's founded by this guy, this oligarch, who's like really close to Putin. He's often called Putin's chef, because for a long time he, ran like catering when Putin did anything. But he's also got, he's got intelligence connections, whatever. But like, it's not a Russian government outfit. It could be connected to it, but like even that's not corroborated. But anyway, this amazing troll farm, all these ads that apparently manipulated the 2016 election, $3,000 US. $3,000 US. I mean, I was saying this in the beginning. We were having on this show, I was having this heated discussions with Mike on this whole thing. Where he was like, yeah, they manipulate everything. I'm like, you could see they showed, like, you could research the banners, like these ads. These were the dumbest fucking ads you've ever seen. Like, I was looking at this and like, if somebody, if this gets somebody who would not vote for Trump to vote for Trump, they must be the dumbest person on the planet. Like, a lot of it was memes. It looked really much like, if you were already a Trump supporter, you'd be like reposting this to like bolster, like if you were a not very smart Trump supporter, you'd be reposting this to your relatives to go like, yeah, see, this is why I'm voting for Trump. But it wouldn't be stuff like where then your parents who don't understand why you vote for Trump would then go, oh yeah, this really, I understand what he's doing now. This really gets me on his side. I'm gonna vote for Trump now. So like, it was bullshit. It was bullshit that this would like actually influence the election. Like, I mean, this whole story, it's just like from the beginning. I've said this like on a very early episode in this podcast. What episode was this? We'll look this up now because I'm really interested in this. Wait, give me a second. privatecitizen.press episodes. Yeah, episode number 2 from 2020. Electronic voting is a threat to democracy. I talked about how at the time the US was and Germany to some extent as well, but like the US was very, very preoccupied by the Russians hacking their election. And at the same time, you have IT security people explaining why it's a bad idea to have electronic voting, right? And it's like people like say, oh, we need to make voting easier and we need to switch to electronic voting. And then a year later, the same people go, oh my God, the Russians are hacking the election. And I'm just pointing out like why like the biggest threat to your election security is your insecure voting machines. Just switch to paper ballots and you'll be fine there, right? And those are the same people who then bring up this Facebook stuff, which is like, I mean, this whole story from the beginning, if you just apply, you don't even have to have journalistic instincts. If you just apply basic common sense to this, if there's a Russian campaign on social media to influence people to vote for Donald Trump, and it is really successful, right? You will not hear of this, from, especially if you're in America. You would not have heard of this from the press. You would have seen it. If it really had that reach, that it would, obviously, as a person who doesn't vote for Trump, if you are on the lookout for this because you think the Russians are manipulating the election, right? So you're on the other side. You're a Clinton voter. You would have had to see it because you were the person they were trying that this would have been targeted at. It wouldn't have been targeted at Trump supporters. They're already voting for Trump. It's like such a, like, if you just think at this if you just sit down and think for 2 minutes and you go like, let's look at this logically. If this was such a huge campaign, I must have seen it, or I must have like heard of people who told me about this. I must have seen it for myself. It wouldn't like have come up in the press. I wouldn't have heard of this in the press. That is probably unlikely. I don't know. I just don't know why. I mean, the press didn't think about that because they wanted to be this. They just didn't check the story because they wanted it to be true, right? As Girth points out here, at the time there were actual scientific and good studies by people who said this was not the case. They just didn't. They had the information. They just didn't want to hear it. So you might even be, to this day, convinced that there was mass manipulation. The point is, at the time, there was absolutely no evidence. Rather to the contrary, what evidence they had at the time was pointing in the other direction. And there was no clear evidence that said the Russians manipulated this election over social media. At least no information that, as we just seen, made any sense. But they still went with it. And as Girth here writes as well, even before that, studies largely ignored by the media pointed to a more modest impact. A book by Harvard researchers, Network Propaganda, published by Oxford University Press in October 2018, found strong evidence of Russian interference operations in America, but noted that, quote, evidence of its impact is scant. A study by Danish and American scholars published by the National Academy of Sciences the following year found, quote, no evidence that interaction with the IRA accounts, quote, substantially impacted the political attitudes and behaviors of Twitter users. The deep dive by Harvard researchers warned that overstating the impact of Russian information operations helps consolidate the aim of operations to disorient American political communications. Still, several years after the 2016 election, many voters believe Russian meddling had a big impact on those results, and the mainstream narrative in journalism was that it had. A study by Rasmussen in April 2022 found that 47% of voters, including 72% of Democrats, think Russian interference likely changed the outcome of the 2016 race. So, this misinformation by the press had a lasting impact. And I think it had a rather historically very ironic impact, because I think, this is my personal opinion, is that this idea that the Russians meddled with this 2016 election, I mean, it did cause all the backlash, all the censorship that we're talking about in the Twitter files. But I think it also caused Hillary Clinton to this day, she's basically refuting, she's denying the outcome of that election. And I think that is what caused Trump to do the same thing in 2020, which again then caused the storm on the Capitol. So I think I don't want to defend that. I think I think it's despicable and very damaging to a democratic state when like the official that loses an election starts disputing that election was kosher, basically. I think that is very bad, and it's bad that Trump did that, especially because it caused that outrage and that attack on the Capitol. Even though I don't think that was as bad as it's been reported, but that's another point. But that is bad. But we cannot ignore that Hillary Clinton did it first, right? People who go, it's all Trump's fault. Trump disputed the election, yeah, but he's not a very smart man. I think he got the idea from Hillary doing it first in 2016. I don't think he would have come up with that on his own. And Hillary kind of made it socially acceptable to do this kind of thing, as we see now, on basically bullshit data. But because the press didn't fucking check, people to this day believe this kind of thing, which is bad. And it's like, I read somewhere else, I don't know if it was in Girth piece, but I also read that, which I also found very interesting, that from the beginning, lots of people who know about like propaganda and intelligence services and like the Russian modus operandi noted from the beginning that this kind of trying to influence the election is really not what the Russians do. So their propaganda, misinformation efforts from the Cold War onwards, but also now, are always, or were kind of like always, the goal was to destabilize and cause chaos in the US. And I don't know. It feels to me like this whole idea that the Russians had manipulated the election, which I don't think came from the Russians, but rather the Democrats kind of did the work for the Russians, because this completely destabilized. Like it's caused people to doubt the outcome of the 2016 election. It caused them to doubt outcome of the 2020 election. It caused the march on the Capitol. It caused a huge division in the public. It caused the press to go on a tangent like this, which was bad because it basically caused Americans to not trust the press anymore, which is bad for democracy as a whole. Yeah, I mean, you could now come up with the conspiracy theory that the Russians wanted to do this from the beginning, but I think this is the way this came about is way too convoluted. I think we and I'm saying like the American democratic society did this to themselves, and they kind of did it to us here in Germany as well, because it's kind of and the UK, it's kind of because the press is here has just taken that coverage and made it their own. It's like we have the same kind of discussions over here, and wherever you are, it's probably the same. I would really like to hear some feedback on this, even though I'm not talking about feedback in this episode. Please feel free to go to privatecitizen.press and send me some of your thoughts on this matter. And maybe if you actually go to the trouble to reading this piece, maybe if you have some comments on what Girth is saying, that would be welcome as well. And now, of course, we have the Mueller investigation, which turned out to be a flop. As Girth writes, meanwhile, the Mueller investigation was winding down. The inquiry had issued more than 2,800 subpoenas, interviewed 500 witnesses, and generated enormous interest. There were 533,000 news articles published involving Russia and Trump or Mueller between Mueller's appointment and the release of his report, according to a study by Newswhip, a media analytics company. The articles led to 245 million interactions on social media. The study, funded by the media site Axios, also found. And of course, now we have this whole Trump Mueller investigation fail. And this is the point where I realized, as the public, we've lost the plot, because not only at this point should the media that went like, oh yeah, Trump's under the influence by the Russians, should have gone, well, we now had this investigation and there's obviously nothing there. They just grasp at straws and at little things that Mueller found, the obstruction, and they just kept piling on and going with the narrative where the horse was dead, and it had been dead for months, and they kept beating the fucking dead horse. So this is where the media has lost the plot. But you could then see in the public at that point, I would have thought, because obviously it seems like I do believe in the good in people. I don't know why, but I would have thought, now, okay, so the media is not going to fess up to the fact that this is all bullshit. All right. But at this point, the public should have gone, well, all this reporting obviously was bullshit. And now you have this, you had the special counsel, you had the investigation, you had Mueller. And instead of people going, well, obviously nothing came out of this, and so the reports in the press can't be right. No, they just kept believing the press. And we're going like, oh yeah, there's some other reasons why Mueller didn't find anything. Oh, maybe Mueller's on the influence of the Russians as well. I don't know what. I don't even understand what the impetus is there, right? I don't. To me, at this point, when people at that point were still like, yeah, Trump's under the influence of the Russians, and I don't know, Mueller didn't find anything for whatever reason, I was like, I can't even understand you anymore, because from my perspective, we had a theory that I thought from the beginning was kind of weird, right? We had lots of press articles, but when actually I could find the sourcing, when I could look at the Steele dossier, when I could figure out who the sources, close to the whatever, like the anonymous sources were, whenever I could actually nail shit down that the journalist based this shit on, I was like, this is not convincing. None of this is convincing. There was nothing that ever came up that was convincing. And then you have the fucking special counsel after this huge investigation going, I can't come up with anything either. This is the point where you go, it's obviously been bullshit from the beginning. But they keep doubling down, right? They keep going. The next thing you have is fucking Trump and the Zelensky phone call, where there were quid pro quo. Didn't we, I think we talked about this on the show. Didn't I talk about this with Mike as well? What episode was that? Let me just look this up. Yeah, we talked about this much later. This was episode 45. In October 2020, or that might actually been at the time. So this is in the run up to the 2020 election. I debated this with Mike, and I was like, this is also bullshit. Like, I fucking read the phone call, and I was like, yeah, you could kind of, like, if you're doing the Adam Schiff thing where he did like kind of the dramatic reading. He literally did a fucking dramatic reading of the phone call where he just basically then editorialized and said things that Trump didn't say. Kind of like, oh, this was what Trump was thinking at the time, which was like made up. Then you could go, yeah, maybe there's something there. But if you just stick to the facts and you go like, what did he actually say? It's like, this is bullshit. Then, of course, you had January 6th, and it was just like one thing after the other. They kept going with this thing. They kept going with this story, the Trump and the Russians. And it was just it's not understandable at the time. And at this point, it's not understandable. But, of course, it's the run-up to the 2020 election. Then we have the Hunter Biden laptop story. I talked about that recently. There's more stuff here. But I'm not gonna. I think I'm also beating a dead horse. I don't think there's anything new here. I would like to read out how Girth ends his analysis, like kind of his takeaway. I think he sums up this coverage really well. I'm going to drink some more coffee, lubricate my voice, and then I'm going to read that out. So if I've got more stuff in the show notes, private citizen not press. If you want more details, it's all there. So Gerst says, I think he's a very old school journalist, right? He says, I've avoided opining in my more than 50 years as a reporter. This time, however, I felt obliged to weigh in. And he's really not, like, the amazing thing about this article is it's been attacked now, of course. But it's, like, if you want to read some old school fucking journalism where it's just, this site says this, and the Times published this, and then this came out in a court meeting. Then I interviewed this guy, and he said this, and he wrote that at the time. It's just, he doesn't fucking opine. Even in his takeaway here at the end is barely any opinion. But okay. I've avoided opining in my more than 50 years as a reporter. This time, however, I felt obliged to weigh in. Why? Because I'm worried about journalism's declining credibility and society's increasing polarization. The two trends, I believe, are intertwined. My main conclusion is that journalism's primary missions, informing the public and holding powerful interests accountable, have been undermined by the erosion of journalistic norms and the media's own lack of transparency about its work. This combination adds to people's distrust about the media and exacerbates frayed political and social differences. One traditional journalistic standard that wasn't always followed in the Trump-Russia coverage is the need to report facts that run counter to prevailing narrative. In January 2018, for example, the New York Times ignored a publicly available document showing that the FBI's lead investigator didn't think, after 10 months of inquiry into possible Trump-Russian ties, that there was much there. This omission disserviced Times readers. The paper says its reporting was thorough and in line with our editorial standards. Another axiom of journalism that was sometimes neglected in the Trump-Russia coverage was the failure to seek and reflect comment from people who are the subject of serious criticism. The Times guidelines call it a special obligation. Yet, in stories by the Times involving such disparate figures as Joseph Misfit, the Maltese academic who supposedly started the whole FBI inquiry, Christopher Steele, the former British spy who authored the dossier, and Konstantin Kilimnik, the consultant cited by some as the best evidence of collusion between Russia and Trump, the paper's reporters failed to include comment from the person being criticized. The Times, in a statement, says some of the subjects were approached on occasion. Yet the paper's guidelines also call for their comments to be published. Another exhibit is a familiar target, anonymous sources. I've used them myself, including sparsely in this piece. What's different in the Trump era, however, is both the volume of anonymous sources and the misleading way they're often described. One frequent and vague catchphrase, people or person familiar with, is widely used by many journalists. The Times used it over 1,000 times in stories involving Trump and Russia between October 2016 and the end of his presidency, according to a Nexus search. The last executive editor I worked for, Bill Keller, frowned on its use. He told the staff repeatedly the phrase was, quote, so vague it could even mean the reporter. The Times, in a statement to CJR, said, we have strong rules in place governing the use of anonymous sources. Other outlets mentioned in this piece declined to discuss their anonymous sourcing practices. Another anonymous sourcing convention that was turbocharged in the Trump era was the use of more neutral descriptors like government official or intelligence official or American official to mask congressional leakers. A few reporters admitted that to me, but of course only anonymously. Here's how it works. First, a federal agency like the CIA or FBI secretly briefs Congress. Then Democrats or Republicans selectively leak snippets. Finally, the story comes out, using vague attribution. It was a problem for us, Mike Corton, the former FBI spokesman until 2018, told me. Corton, who also worked in Congress, added, we would brief Congress, try and give them a full picture with the negative stuff, and then a member of Congress can cherry-pick the information, and the reporter doesn't know they've been cherry-picked. The typical reader or viewer is clueless. My final concern and frustration was the lack of transparency by media organizations in responding to my questions. I reached out to more than 60 journalists. Only about half responded. Those who did, more than a dozen agreed to be interviewed on the record. However, not a single major news organization made available a newsroom leader to talk about their coverage. And that is like shocking. He's got like fucking Donald Trump quoted in this piece. He's got this FBI guy. He's got Bob Woodward, for fuck's sake. He's got like really good sources. He talked to Steele. He talked to I couldn't talk to Mifsud because he's went missing. But like he talked to Kalimnik. He talked to like a lot of people. And like the journalists are the ones who are declining to talk about their stories. You know why? Because they know they fucked up and they don't want to admit to it, which is a disgrace. And what's even more disgraceful, some of the journalists, like this Korn dude, actually, when this story got published, they are actually then attacking him, even though they didn't give him any information when he asked them, or like even they declined to comment. But they can fucking slack this piece on Twitter, right? And have hot takes. It is fucking disgraceful. Some of these journalists are attacking him because he interviewed Trump, right? Oh, because Trump's not trustworthy, you cannot interview him. Like I think I think Matt Taibbi talks to him about this in like the interview, and he goes like, or it's the CJR also has a podcast where Girth actually talked a little bit about like this piece, and he is like, I don't understand like my colleagues who go, you can't interview Trump because he's not trustworthy. If he's the main point of this, of course you go interview him. If he tells you something that is not true, you can editorialize and you can say, well, it's obviously not true because of this. But like, the same people that are taking a made-up fucking dossier from a fucking failed British spy, say Donald Trump is the former president of the United States of America, is not trustworthy, but some sleazy fucking British spy who thinks he's James Bond and just makes up some fucking dossier, that guy's trustworthy? You trust intelligence service officials, professional liars, and then you say the president of the United States, he might not be trustworthy, but like your fucking sources are less trustworthy. It's like, what the oh, sorry. That makes me so angry. Anyway, so Girth ends here with what I think is really chilling, but also a very good analysis. One I probably agree with wholeheartedly. He sums this whole thing up and says, during this time, when the media is under extraordinary attack and widely distrusted, a transparent, unbiased, and accountable media is more needed than ever. It is one of a journalist's best tools to distinguish themselves from all the misinformation, gossip, and rumor that proliferates on the web and then gets legitimized on occasion by politicians of all stripes, including Trump. Jennifer Kavanagh, senior fellow in the American Statecraft program of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, told me of her concerns about news silos. Quote, if you are only getting your news from one source, you are getting a skewed view, which, she said, quote, increases polarization and crowds out the room for compromise because people base their views on these siloed news sources. She added, people don't have time to deal with nuance, so they settle on a position and everything else tends to become unacceptable. I mean, we've talked about this on this show time and time again and identified this as really a problem of our times. Anyway, Girth says here in the end, Walter Lippmann, a well-known journalist and also wrote a lot about propaganda. Anyway, Walter Lippmann wrote about these dangers in his 1920 book, Liberty and the News. Lippmann worried that when journalists, quote, arrogate to themselves the right to determine by their own conscience what shall be reported and for what purpose, democracy is unworkable, end quote. That's how he ends this story. And I mean, this is like the fucking Bernays book. This is from 1920. And it's kind of perfectly describes our problem today. This is what happens. This is like a guy in 1920 saying, when journalists basically decide what should be reported, when they don't base this on their readers, but on their conscience, then we're fucked. Democracy's fucked. And it's exactly what is happening now, right? It's when journalists even admit and say, yes, we're activists. We're activists. And you had I don't know, what was it recently? Can't remember what publication it was, but they were basically objectivity is out. Modern journalists, young journalists, they're objectivity is bullshit. We should just all be activists. Your job or my job as a journalist is to write for my readers. As a podcaster, I work for you. I work for the listeners. My job is to tell you what I think you need to know. Of course, I decide. Of course, I've talked about this. Everybody has, everybody's subjective. Everybody has biases. You can't help that. You can't get rid of that. You can only be transparent about that, and you should. But I see it as my job to tell you as the listener, or if I write something, my reader, to tell you what I see, what I think is fact, what I perceive in the world. And of course, I make a decision what I think you should know, what I think is newsworthy. Every journalist has to do that. But I'm not saying I decide what you need to know, right? I'm not going, I need to. Lots of journalists these days, they're they're like bad teachers. They're going, you need to know. And they even write articles like this. This is why the planet is in danger. And this is why you should be buying electric cars or whatever. Or this is why Donald Trump is evil. That is not the role of a journalist, right? That's the role of an activist. If you think your job is to educate the public about the dangers of global warming, you should work in the PR department of Greenpeace. You shouldn't work at the newspaper, right? Because if you believe that, you will never see if there's other evidence, and I'm not saying there is, but it's just your job as a journalist to also look at the other stuff. If the prevailing theory is that Donald Trump is being controlled by the Russians, you also have to look to evidence that is contrary to that, and you have to report that, as Girth says here, which wasn't done. If there is writing a lot of articles about how this election has been manipulated on social media, and you have contrary evidence, you need to report that. And that's why I always do these kind of things, because I get attacked for this constantly. And I think I would have a lot more readers, just like the New York Times, and a lot more listeners if I did what people like the Times do, write for their audience and go okay, this is the people that have I don't know, that are reading my things, and I will now tell them what they want to know. But that's not that. I don't see that as my job, right? If I saw that as my job, I don't know, work for a PR department or something. It's to me, it's very frustrating that that journalists seem to have forgotten this, because I see that the same way as Girth does. I see that this has a profound influence on society, and you can see that from this Trump-Russia story. You can see the effect very clearly. You have a large number of people who, to this day, say that Trump is influenced by the Russians. They helped him win this election, which, as Girth points out, is becoming even more important now because we have another election coming up and Trump's running again. Not that I want Trump to win that fucking election. I don't. But it's obvious in hindsight that this reporting was wrong. It was based on bad sources. We finally found out, like, through no help of the fucking journalists who covered this, we finally found out where all this is based on. You know, the dossier and how all this got leaked, like how basically the press rings up the FBI, the FBI briefs Trump, and then it's like a government briefing, and now we can use it in the press again. Like, all of this, the way it was sourced, all of this comes out. All the information that was contrary, that people at the time knew, that wasn't being looked at because they were just so busy having fucking TV crews in their newsroom and posing for the cameras to be the next Bob Woodward and to be in the next All the President's Men. It's like, I can't even, like, if I look at the story, and I've been thinking about this a lot in the last weeks when I, couldn't record this podcast, but I was like thinking about what I would say and thinking about the show. I was like, I can't even decide what is worse. How bad the story was handled, or I think what is worse is there being us not having learned from this, the journalists not having learned from this, the public not having learned from this, and people just completely ignoring the outcome and completely ignoring what this all means. Not only that we can't trust the press, but that we need to. I think that what Girth and Kavanaugh here at the end are basically saying, that if the press goes and diverges from their mission, right? From calling people in power to account, and from kind of trying to paint the picture of the world as it is, to writing for their audience, that is happening, right? That leads to these news silos, that leads to the New York Times readers believing what the Times says, the Fox News viewers believing what Fox News says, and it both kind of not being the reality, right? It both being slanted. And I don't know. I mean, this is not something new. I mean, I've talked often about how before there was objectivity in the press, you kind of had in the early 20th century, late 19th century, you had like these publications who were basically, every political party, for example, in Germany had their own publication. And you knew that they were biased. But like the people at the time, I think, knew that, and they were, it was kind of obvious that if you wanted to have a picture of what was really going on, that you have to read like different sources. And I think the problem is people today, they're not doing that. The New York Times readers don't realize that what's in the Times isn't reality, that it is heavily slanted. They make fun of like almost, it's just hard to put this into words because I just can't understand these people. But like, these people make fun of the Fox News viewers and say like, what's on Fox News is obviously not reality. And then they watch like Rachel Maddow and they believe that to be reality. And they just can't conceptualize. They can't even, like, their brain can't process even the idea that it's both the same, right? Only on different angles. And so they believe what their newscaster says to be absolute truth. And the rest is all lies. And the other side is just the other way around. And I think that's what Kavanaugh means, right? There's no getting these people together. There's no consensus in society anymore. It's just not possible. And this is so destructive to a society, and I have no idea how we can get out of this anymore. And what like it doesn't dismay me that people are like that, right? That's a societal phenomenon. What dismays me is that journalists don't see that. Like that the people writing for the Times don't see what they're doing. I don't know, I would say the people on Fox News, but like I know I've lost all faith in those people. But like generally the people that write for the Times and the Washington Post, I think, are relatively intelligent. And they're supposed to be progressive, so they should understand all of this. At least now, I mean, when you read what like the future generation of journalists, like the people that are really young, that are in their like 20s or even younger now, what they talk about when they talk about these things, I'm just I mean, I sound like an old man, but I am an old man, but it's just absolutely dismaying. I can't see how like this is going to get any better. You know, I think I've told the story on the show before, but I was like at this journalism conference where basically all the journalists, they were all like basically advocating for how journalists now need to be more biased, and they need to be activists, and we need to save the planet. And then the only guy who was talking about, no, what we need to do is like we need to be careful about facts, and we need to call things what they actually are and understand the realities of things. Was like a former propaganda guy from the German army who now works for a PR company, right? And he was, I was just drawn to his talk because he was talking about how, you know, it's important about, you know, war is a very important topic, but journalists can't tell like a mobile anti-aircraft battery from a tank, right? Or they can't, tell a self-propelled howitzer from a tank. Even though it's like very important to know what these things are if you're reporting about this, which would have been like 20. There was an old school journalist who was actually with him, like an expert for these kind of things, who was actually like doing the talk with him, who said like 20 years ago, this was like a no-brainer. Right? That if you wanted to get reporting wrong, you need to get the specifics right. And there was actually a young journalist. She was like maybe 18. I don't know. She was like just coming up, and she was like actually asking the question. She was unironically asking the question. So he was at the point he was talking about what an assault rifle is, right? And I've talked about this on the show before, I think, as well. Like, it drives me insane when people call an AR-15 an assault rifle, because, you know, an assault rifle per definition is a gun that can shoot on full auto, which an AR-15 specifically is not. So it's just a rifle. It doesn't have selective fire. But like, he was talking about something like this, and then this young journalist she said like, but is it really important? It's a gun that kills people. You know, is it important if this is like a pistol or a submachine gun? And then he said, well, if you actually, you know, in a war, if you actually somebody starts shooting at you, yes, it is very important if somebody just, you know, shoots 8 bullets at you in 5 seconds or like 80. And it's important to kind of know if these bullets, you know, can penetrate the steel, like, you know, that car that you're hiding behind, or if they will just go through the car, go through you. Or like the other example was like a machine gun, right? People call assault rifles, especially in Germany, Maschinengewehr. They call, they call an assault rifle, which in Germany would be a Sturmgewehr. They call it Maschinengewehr, which is a machine gun. Right, which is like let's say a 50 BMG caliber, you know, machine gun. And he's like, it's very important when you're talking about these things. If you're talking about a weapon where you like basically shoot at people, you know, an assault rifle where, you know, you attack people between like 50 and 100 meters from you, whereas like a machine gun is basically something to use to shoot at something that's 800 meters away. And you're kind of trying to destroy a whole building. And it's just that, just to me, just reflected this attitude that you could see that all over the place. And it seems to be worse with young journalists. I don't blame her, but like, it just, she literally asked the questions, why would I need to be specific in my article? Right. And we were kind of having a discussion, and I said, one of the reasons is because anybody who knows what you're writing about, so anybody who owns a gun, which in Germany is a significant amount of people, it's many more people than people normally think, right? People think, in America, everybody owns a gun, and in Germany, they don't, which is like completely wrong. Like it's like almost every third or fourth Germans. Like a lot of people have guns in Germany. It's just nobody knows about it because it's not very, it's people don't like to talk about it. But like everybody who it's like every topic. It's like I'm a tech journalist. I was explaining, like if I write about something very specific and I get it wrong, then everybody who reads that article, who knows what I'm talking about, will not trust me anymore. And that's the same thing that happens to you. Like if you write about, so it doesn't matter if it's a gun or if it's an IP network protocol, right? Or if you write an article about like a hacker attack and you can't tell UDP and TCP/IP apart, like anybody who knows what you're writing about will immediately never trust you anymore. They're like, this guy has no idea what they're talking about. And that is kind of the same thing. But like, to me, it's not bad getting these things wrong. I've gotten them wrong in the past myself. That's not the problem. Not understanding that you should get them right. Like, what is that? Where does that come from? Like, how? Like, that's like being a car mechanic and you're like, oh, who cares if I put like this nut in the wrong way? Well, if you're braking on the highway and you're going 120 and your brake doesn't work because you fucking put that nut in the wrong way, the steering wheel comes off, that's a problem. Like, why? Like, isn't that a basic thing about like your job, wanting to do it well? I get the, like, when we're talking about this whole Trump-Russia coverage, I get the covering it up, right? That's just human. You want to save your own ass. I mean, that's just normal. I expect that of people. That's understandable. But like the whole, like not even understanding how like getting shit like this wrong and then not being transparent about how like that fucking, like on a, I understand that these people don't think about the societal impact, but like they should think about their impact on their career or their paper. The problem is that nobody cares anymore, right? People still read the New York Times, and they're still, even worse, they still think this reporting was correct, was good. It hurts me. It hurts me so much. But at least at the end here, before I wrap this up, I just want to say thank you, Jeff Girth. At least we have one guy who took like a hell of a lot of time, took like a year and a half, and wrote 24,000 words to actually show this. And actually, really provide some really good evidence of things that, people like me knew. I knew that all this coverage was shit, but I didn't sit down and do this work. And it's very important work. And I've got a lot of respect for the Columbia Journalism Review for actually publishing this, because it's really, really important. So, there are still some good journalists out there doing good work. I just don't know how long that's going to be the case anymore, but these days they're probably at Substack, which I think we'll talk about in one of the next episodes of another example of that. But I think really, really good work here, and something you can actually point to people, right? If you have somebody who you really think you care about, and they still believe some of this shit, you can go here. There's some really good reporting done on that, like some really good post-mortem, or I think Girth himself calls it like an autopsy of the of the coverage. And yeah, the horse is long dead, but still very important. Yeah, anyway, I think I hope I could condense this down a little bit for you. I realize it's been 2 hours, but believe me, that was a lot shorter than actually reading that whole piece. So yeah, I hope that did help a little bit. And this is normally the point where I would talk about a little bit of feedback that I've gotten from the producers, so the people who listen to the show and write in, which I did. I did get some feedback on the previous episodes, but I will not talk about that today because this episode has been long enough. But I would still like to use this moment to tell you, please, if you have some comments on this very episode, please write in. I'm gonna discuss those comments probably in an upcoming episode. So go to privatecitizen.press and click on contact or producer feedback in any of the show notes. And as these show notes are very long, there's now on the side of this, there's like a table of contents now, and you can click on producer feedback, and it scrolls you right down to the contact link. And with that, I mean that those are, you become a producer once you do that. Once you write in and help out with content, maybe you have some ideas of topics you want me to cover in the future. It's also very welcome. But there are also other producers that I have to thank now. These people are equally important because they keep the show on the road. These are my Patreon supporters. So the people that have basically subscribed and are paying me every month a small amount. There's different amounts. I think $1 is, or whatever the equivalent is in your currency, is the associate producer contribution, and anything. Everything and anything is very much appreciated. It doesn't really matter how much you can afford. This is kind of the value for value model, which means, pick whatever it's worth to you, what you can afford. And if you can't, it's also good. So I don't want to harp on about this any longer than I have to, because I don't want to give you a bad feeling if you're not supporting the show. That's, you can also write in if you want to, or you just listen to it. It's nice if people write in. If only they write in one time and tell me, I really enjoy the show, that they get a kick out of that as well. But yeah, with that, let's talk about the people who brought this show to you and made it worth my while. So thanks to my showrunner, Sorgal Taran, executive producers Butterbeans, Jaroslav Lichtblau, Rizal, and Sandman616. My supervising producers, One Eye 11G, Avis, Bennett Piata, Dave, IKN, Jackie Plage, Jonathan M. Hidai, Krankel, Michael Mullen Jensen, Robert Forster, and Tobias Weber. Producers, Andrew Davidson, Astro C, Cam, Captain Eckert, David Potter, Dirk Didi, Fadi Mansour, Florian P. Gorsch, Joe Poser, Michael Small, Mika, Mr. Amish, Rick Bragg, RJ Tracy, and associate producers Barry Williams, D, Jonathan, Johan Sonen, Kai CS, Ricky M, Steve Hose, and Vlad. Thanks to all of you. I need to do some fixing of the show notes here. There's a comma. There's a one comma too much in there. Too many. I don't know. Fixed it now. So thanks to all of you. It's very much appreciated. What's also appreciated is Bindmark at bindmark.co.uk, because they provide the servers that make this show happen as well, because that's where you get the audio files from, and I get those servers for free, and I couldn't afford them. So thanks to Bindmark for doing that. And let's get out of here. As you can hear, my voice is kind of leaving me. That's kind of the limit of what I can do right now, I guess. So the show's theme song is called Acoustic Roots by Rul Kabazali, and I'm going to play you out now with a lovely little bit of jazz. It's appropriately named Jazz by Night, and it by now it is night over here as I record this, so it's very fitting. Jazz by Night by Martin Landström and Gustav Lundgren, which I got from Epidemic Sound license. So it's a very nice little jazz number. So I hope you enjoy that, and I'll see you soon. Hopefully I'll have another episode out this week now that I can record again, and the neighbors are not, as you could not hear, which is good. They weren't disassembling or assembling any furniture right now, so I'm grateful for that, and I'll hope I'll be back with a more steady release schedule from now on. My computer's also fixed, so that should help. So see you soon. Until then, aim to misbehave, and one good way to do that is think for yourself once in a while. Don't just believe the New York Times or whoever is copying them. Just try to think about things for yourself. Actually, I'll have to go again on that one. I'll fix that in post. Sorry about that. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for hanging out. Gizmo, I'm going to call you Gizmo now. Indie Gamiacs, Stuhlpenner, thanks everybody for being here and staying with me through this very long episode. I'm gonna run now. I'm gonna need to fix myself something to eat. I'm really, really hungry. I worked out before doing the podcast. Probably wasn't the best idea. And now I'm very hungry. And then I'm gonna try to get this show out. I'm gonna rate you to Deadly Slop now, who is still raiding as well. In Tarkov, I was watching him before I went live, and now he's still looking for his fucking. He's trying to find a military radio, I think. Yeah, so I'm gonna rate you to Deadly Slop. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll hope I'll be back with some more streams soon. Try to get more into a rhythm there as well. I need to ease myself back into that. It's just been one thing after the other, but I hope things will start to normalize here again, and then I'll probably be able to stream some games as well. Yeah, thanks for watching. See you soon, and have some fun with Deadly Slop for me. See you soon.